Stillwater Critical Minerals President and CEO Michael Rowley joining us today. There you go. Perfect. And we have Byron King joining us as well. So Byron can jump onto the screen. Hello, Byron.
Hello there. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to see you too. Let's do the gallery view here for everyone. There, we're all on screen. So Byron, I haven't seen you since the Yukon property tours recently. So that's, yeah, you look learned. You look learned with your background there.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's good. It's good to be here. I brought my rock hammer. And I brought my Brunton compass. Even though, you know, I think somewhere along the way we said this would be live from the core shack. I'm not in the core shack.
We did,
I'm far away, but it's almost as good. It's the next best thing.
Well, since we whiffed on that for you a little bit, Byron, we'll make up for that. I think in what is it? In a couple of weeks, you'll be at the core shack yourself.
Core shack in a couple of weeks. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So enjoying a nice vacation. And Mike, haven't seen you for 3 days or so. So
good to see you, and good to see you, Byron.
Thanks.
And of course, you were at the core shack in 2019.
I was out there in, I believe, October of 2019. I remember it because it was the last field trip I took, you know, out west before, you know, a couple of months later, COVID hit and shut the world down. But we had a really great time. And I'll just begin by saying that, you know, I went out there, you know, to sort of, okay, what is this thing you guys are talking about? I mean, I've heard of Stillwater and everything. And we went out to the field and we literally jumped off the helicopter. We walked down the hillside through the snow. It was an early snow there. And we get to the drill deck and the guys are pulling core out of the ground and they're whacking it with the hammer and the core sort of like sliding down onto the wooden pallets, you know. And I pick up this chunk of core, like just greasy, wet, oily core right out of the ground. And it's nickel sulfide staring me right in the face. You can't fake that. You know, you could not salt that mine. So that we got off on the right foot, and it's been a great walk ever since. You know,
that was the CZ target. That's right. Our first drill campaign there. That one's paid off nicely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll jump into, and we'll definitely get to the project. And I'm looking forward to having you done. I should have apologized for wearing a t-shirt. This was part of what I was saying at the beginning. I had some technical issues that I was solving right up to the last minute, and I didn't put my collared shirt on. So we'll green screen that out or chroma it out. So just maybe we'll start with a kind of a more broad. Byron, why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself before we dive in, for those who may not know you as well.
Well, I'm a geologist by training and background. I've done a lot of other things in life too, including, you know, spending time in the U.S. Navy and such. But I'm a geologist. I studied a lot of physics, a lot of chemistry along the way. I'm a mineralogy kind of guy, if there's any focus to it. And I am also a newsletter writer. I've been doing this newsletter thing for actually, this is like my 20th year of newsletter writing. I'm going to say right now up front that I'm not giving anybody personal investment advice. That's one of those legal things that I have to say. And I suppose, Mike, you know, you don't want to be making forward-looking statements that are, you know, whatever. But but anybody who's watching this, you know, we're going to talk about nickel and economics. We're going to talk about, you know, the Stillwater Critical Minerals Company. This is not personal financial advice. I have to say that. The lawyers make me say that. So. But I've been covering energy, mines, and minerals for many years. I've probably visited at least 250 different projects in North, South America, Africa, Australia, Russia, Asia. So I've seen a few things and kind of know what to look for. And today we're going to talk about you know platinum, palladium, nickel, copper, Stillwater, Montana, et cetera, et cetera. You know, this next hour is to benefit the watchers and the viewers and listeners out there. So it's all about you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Byron. I guess that would be a good jumping off point for us to mention that we may be making some forward-looking statements, and would refer you to the disclaimer, and we'll put that up front on the recorded version as well. It's almost inescapable to do so, but again, there may be those, so just keeping that in mind. And I guess we should also mention that we will have Dr. Danie Grobler joining us in a few moments. We'll just get some of the sort of macro, broader discussion behind us, and then we'll turn Danie and Mike and Byron loose on critical minerals and nickel sulfide and chromatite stringers and all the rest of the good stuff. So Byron, macro picture, just, I mean, where to start with global? I mean, you have the obvious horrible events unfolding, continuing to unfold in Ukraine, economic slowdown elsewhere. Maybe unpack that in a broad brush, and then we'll dig in.
Well, there's obviously the military side of Ukraine. It has created upheaval across the world economy. Everybody knows that. If you've been anywhere other than Antarctica for the last 6 months, you know what's going on. You may or may not know. I mean, if you're watching this, you probably do. Russia is a key global supplier of many, many things. I mean, obviously oil and gas, that's in the news every day, but also, one of the world's great suppliers of nickel, copper, platinum, palladium, many, many, many other metals is Russia. One of their great companies in terms of, massive supplying mining firms is Norilsk, a company that dates back to the days of Stalin in the 1930s. The Norilsk nickel project is one of the great, mines of the world. It's not just nickel. I think they mine something like 32 different elements there. And so when the world puts sanctions on Russia, when the world makes it difficult to trade with Russia, that completely upheaves the metals markets. Back in, like late February, early March, the price of nickel pretty much way over doubled in a matter of literally days. I mean, it just, rocket shot kind of price chart back in March, and it has since settled back down. But in general terms for nickel, I mean, the price of nickel is at least double what it was, say, 2 years ago. And it has to do with nickel being used in more and more used in batteries. I mean, most of the world's nickel, I mean, most people think of nickels as like the little coins in their pocket, well, that's like nickel and copper, yeah. But most of the world's nickel is in stainless steel or other metal alloys. I mean, you drive nickel in your car, you use it in your electric iron, you have nickel on your bathroom faucets probably, you have nickel on the little silverware that you eat, you eat your lunch with and everything else. Nickel is everywhere. And much of it is metallurgical, probably like over 75%, probably 80% is just metallurgical alloy nickel. But a growing amount, it used to be 3%, 5%, now it's up towards 10% of the world's nickel is being used in batteries because you can get extra energy density in a battery. So, most of a lithium battery is nickel, actually a lot of graphite in there too. But so nickel demand is there. Now you get to supply. And I'll just Mike, you know this, but I'll mention it since I'm on a roll here. Most of the world's nickel resource is in a mineral called, it's a rock really called laterite, which is a very, very highly eroded sort of rock mineral / soil. I mean, people debate it. You get it from Indonesia, the Philippines, highly weathered rocks that have just everything else is kind of washed away, but there's still some nickel in there. Much of the world's resources there. That's a whole different kind of processing than what we're going to talk about today, which is like the nickel sulfides, and that's the mineralogical nickel that you find in hard rock mining. Famous locales aside from Norilsk in Russia would be, say, Sudbury, Ontario, Boise's Bay up in like northern Canada there. The U.S. mines a little bit of nickel itself, and there's a mine in Michigan, but it's kind of playing out. It's probably going to close down the next 2, 3, 4 years. There are other nickel projects in the U.S. that have had all sorts of issues. I mean, in Minnesota, for example, there's some beautiful geology in Minnesota that would give the world some really great nickel, except that they're tied up in environmental problems. Company like Polymet or Talon, they've spent decades, almost 20 years, just litigating the environmental side of it. And then we get to Montana. Hello, Montana, there we are. And this is why we're here, is that we don't have the problems in Montana that we have other places, but we do have the nickel. So Is that enough?
Yeah, that was great, and that gives I can toss it over to Mike just to jump on that. I just wanted to come back to that sort of setting the table globally. So you do have the supply, you'll have the demand. I mean, the EVs and the stainless steel and the rest, like you said, nickel is pretty much everywhere. And that applies to a lot of other commodities as well. I mean, we have the PGEs, for example, which Norilsk is obviously famous as a palladium resource as well. And those other metals coming from South Africa, Zimbabwe, and so on. Cobalt, for example, coming out of the DRC. And what we've seen kind of arise more and more is this, don't want to call it resource nationalism quite, but the domestic sourcing of these metals. And in particular, I mean, you can see our name, Critical Minerals, we did that for a reason. Yeah, Mike, maybe a jumping off point for some of that domestic supply movement push.
Sure, that's an excellent setup. Thank you both. We've seen a lot of focus from actually all governments globally in this deglobalization effort lately, this awareness that supply chains are critical and ethical supply is also important. And this project that we have in Montana combines both of those. Most recently, we've seen US legislation that makes a rapid push for domestic sourcing of battery metals in EVs and in general use. And that's music to our ears. Frankly, as Byron mentioned, the US has one small nickel mine and it's going to be replaced by another small nickel mine in 2026. And Tesla has bought most, if not all, the supply from that one. There's no nickel processing capacity in the US, and they're rapidly starting to address these things. And it's excellent to see. Further wrinkle to that, of course, is that it takes up to 15 years to build a new mine. And we are beside producing mines, in fact, the highest grade palladium platinum mines in the world in Montana. So not a grade and size and potential for scale aside on what we're doing, we also could show excellent infrastructure locally and a quick path to production. US government recently made the point, it was the Benchmark Minerals fellow, Simon Moore, made the point that it takes 2 years to build a battery plant and 7 years on average to build a mine. So you've got a terrific supply crunch coming on that early supply end of the chain. Nickel exploration, more than many other commodities, was starved out, particularly in the past 10 years. There are very few projects in the pipeline, and we're happy to be there. Final point for me, I guess, is to touch on what Chris said, that we are, in fact, polymetallic. Nickel makes up about half of our value at current metal prices. Next would be palladium. We're also significant copper and cobalt in the US. Cobalt, very real when you consider most of the world's supply is from the DRC. And then platinum, useful for hydrogen, and on down, rhodium and gold and these other things. So we offer that attractive basket of in-demand commodities, and we also offer unusual potential for scale with these South African models that we'll touch on later with Danie.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And with the critical minerals push, I mean, that phrase is something that's come into the kind of more common lexicon here, especially in, let's say, the last 12 months or so. Just in the news recently, obviously, was the, what was it called? The Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
Which in there has provisions for, a lot of these green economy initiatives. And then there's other legislation as well that when you tuck into it a little bit, which we have since joining becoming more involved with the National Mining Association, are real funding initiatives and government support for development of some of these things, carbon sequestration, for example, the production of these critical minerals, in particular, things cited like cobalt, and sourcing and production, and green hydrogen sourcing as well. So really kind of the right time for a project that checks a lot of those boxes, 8 of the critical minerals. Byron, does it back on sort of because in the junior mining space, sort of a good market floats all boats, so to speak. And it's been tumultuous, to say the least, It seems like every time we think we're getting a break and things are on the rise, then there'll be some statement by a Federal Reserve official, or there'll be a bot reaction to some data point that comes out. Last week, things looked pretty good, like we were turning around. And then this week, there's some question marks about, are we heading into recession? Well, define recession, but you get my point. So is it going to be, what's it going to be? Where are we heading in the next 12 months? Not to put you on the spot.
Well, in the next 6 to 12 months, I don't think it's too hard to figure out. I'll illustrate it with a point that I think everybody out there who's watching can relate to. Drive down the street and go to the gas station, and the price of gasoline or diesel fuel, whatever you put in your car, is less now than it was, a month ago, 5-6 weeks ago. I mean, yesterday I drove by a gas station. I noticed that the price was well over $1 less than what I was paying just over a month ago. And you think, oh, this is great, man. The price of gas is going down. This is terrific. Well, not really, because it's good that it's going down. That's nice. I'd pay less for gas. But what that reflects is, it doesn't reflect that anybody went out and found a whole lot of new oil. Okay. It doesn't reflect that anybody went out and built a whole lot of new refineries, because you don't put oil in your car, you put refined oil in your car, you put gasoline in your car. It means that demand is down. It's demand destruction. What happened? Well, everybody got so busy paying $5 and $6 and, depending where you are, $7 a gallon for gasoline, or more in Canada, that they're all tightening up. We're in the middle of a recession. I mean, you can say, well, not a real recession. It's, we've redefined what a recession is. Okay, if you're rich and you live in the East, the East and the West Coast, and you okay, you don't know that there's a recession. If you spend time in the rest of the country, as I do, which is my job, you will realize that there is a recession. So in terms of the next 6 or 7 months, it's going to be tough times. And oh, by the way, it's the middle of August right now. It's beautiful. It's warm. It's we're talking about heat waves and everything else. You better get ready to spend 2 and 3 times as much to heat your house this winter as you're spending, say, last year. The price of gas, natural gas is going up. Electricity prices are going up. Heating oil prices are going up. So, unless you go out and chop your own trees and burn firewood, keep your house warm, you're going to spend a lot more, to heat your house this winter. So we're looking at a hard time ahead. That's just baked into the pie. But we're talking about, building projects that take 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 years and that have 50-year lifetimes. So, you don't want to let too much of the short term, influence your long-term thinking. Obviously, stock markets go up and down, and you don't want to buy, you don't want to buy into a roller coaster that's going down. But anyhow, that's kind of what we're looking at, as far as the macro setup for things. Looking ahead in terms of bringing it back into the mining. I mean, in the next, it's August. You've got a field program in Montana. You're going to pay what you're going to pay for the diesel fuel, for the for the field hands that you need, for the helicopter support that you need, whatever. That's going to cost whatever it's going to cost, and that's built in. But it's going to be the data that you pull out of the ground, the geophysics, the geochemistry, the rock samples, the cores, the chemical analyses. That's your IP. That's building the base for this particular project that you're working on. At least that's my newsletter writer's view of kind of why we're here today.
Yeah, and it's interesting that everything's related. There's I don't want to say a vicious circle quite, but so you have the oil prices have fallen off and so on. But like you said, that demand, in the winter when you're heating your homes, and that's kind of a global thing too. I mean, the talk in Germany and elsewhere about energy costs and things like that. But that's going to find its way into prices at the grocery store and so on, for examples as well. Okay. So, and then what is the fiscal and monetary policy response going to be to that? I think we kind of have history as a guide that there'll be money thrown at it. I mean, there was, I guess this Inflation Reduction Act is kind of a watered down version or a slightly smaller version of the big Build Back Better bill, which again, pumping money into the system. So it's going to be where the US dollar goes will obviously impact against that as well. And then rates, interest rates, and so on.
Oh, you could compare it also to a Stalin 5-year plan, you know, and you know, because this you know, the IRA, this Inflation Reduction Act, I mean, it's industrial policy. I mean, it's all sorts of things. It's the whole, you know, bag of everything that they could possibly stuff into it, throw it against the wall, see what sticks. But there's a lot of industrial policy in it. And, you know, we could talk about, oh, they're going to hire 87,000 IRS agents. Well, yeah, great. You know, I mean, the Army can't recruit enough soldiers, but we're going to hire 87,000, you know, IRS agents. You know, that there's a whole sociological statement there. But in terms of industrial policy, there's a lot of money, a lot of tax credits, a lot of, you know, kind of regulatory shifting going inside that bill. And it's, you know, we're going to have to read it to find out what's in it, because I don't think anybody really knows. It's one of those 2,500 page bills, you know. But there's a lot of money in there that's going to go for these allegedly green things. And it hits in different ways. I mean, there are, for example, I mean, tax credits to buy an electric vehicle. You think, well, how does that help the mining industry? Well, to the extent that it helps General Motors, Ford, et cetera, you know, it incentivizes them to really, you know, push forward with battery-powered vehicles. It creates a better environment for, you know, for the fundamental miner who's looking for that offtake agreement. You know, I think you mentioned, Mike, you know, that Elon Musk and Tesla, you know, they're out there, you know, looking to buy nickel. I think a couple of years ago, didn't Musk say something like, anybody who's out there, you know, mining nickel efficiently and environmentally correctly, I'll give you a contract, you know? Yeah, sure. And so there you go. Now, at the same time, the internal combustion engine isn't going away. And on the back of that internal combustion engine is a catalytic converter. And there's your platinum and palladium demand, you know, a big whack of that. You know, they use platinum, palladium for other things too, but a big whack of the PGM, platinum group metal demand is catalytic converters for the automobile industry. There's a lot of recycling, but not enough. And we're speaking kind of in this North American perspective, but you know, we also have, you know, South African associations here, and South Africa is a fabulous country in terms of its mining industry, its mining history, you know, the depth of knowledge, the PGMs, et cetera. So there's plenty to do based on, you know, just this recent law. It's not, you know, when you say, well, it's all those IRS agents. Well, it's not all bad, because there's actually a lot of incentive to help the battery metals industry in there, if you know where to look.
I think that's it.
And solar cells and wind, and with that, all the infrastructure that's associated with it. You know, the American electrical grid needs upgrading, full stop. But especially as you pile on all these additional demands, and then there's stationary storage as well, of course, and the whole EV movement, right? As we push for 10% EV penetration by 2030 or something. Yeah. We need, I've just read 30 new nickel mines, you know, to make these targets, and similar for other metals. Where's that going to come from? Especially if it's domestic and ethically sourced, and not this dirtier stuff that you mentioned from Indonesia via China.
Oh, I should just add that another angle of the recently passed law, this, you know, Inflation Reduction Act, is that the tax credits and a lot of the other, you know, incentives go towards domestic production, you know, unionized labor, domestic production. And when I say domestic, I mean Canada as well, because of the North American, you know, trade agreements and such. And so it actually, when we talk about resource nationalism, sometimes we think, oh, resource nationalism, that means people far away, they're mad at the West, and so they're going to nationalize the mine, or they're going to nationalize the oil wealth. Well, there's a resource nationalism here too, in the sense that there's an effort to try to kickstart a mining industry that in the U.S. is fairly dead. And Canada is not as dead, but you know, it still has an uphill climb. I was at a conference not too long ago where somebody gave a chart. They actually showed how many hard rock mining places there are in the United States. The United States. How many do you think there are? Well, you think, oh, there must be thousands. No, not really. There's thousands of legacy sites, but in terms of hard rock active mining sites in the US, it's about 300. And about half of them are quarries for, gravel and, granite and marble and stuff like that. There's fewer than 150 active hard rock metal mining, projects ongoing in the United States, which is a very big place. And in terms of the landscape footprint of that, it is some fraction of a percent of the country and certainly of federal lands, out west. So the U.S. mining industry is very small, and it has been in bad shape for a long time in terms of how many people work there, how many schools actually train people to work there, the kinds of infrastructure that there is. I mean, there are way more people who work at Arby's, the fast food place, than there are in the entire mining industry in the United States.
And I think Robert Friedland has recognized that. Ivanhoe Electric is focused on especially the Western US and actually Montana, back to a state that we all love. 169 million IPO and active projects in Montana and elsewhere in the Western US. Rio Tinto, with their smelter and operations in Utah, are embracing this domestic supply movement and stand to benefit from it, right? And then, of course, Stillwater. Americans don't seem to realize, as I tour the country talking about this, that's world-class geology. Geologists all over the world study it. It's a fantastic 40-kilometer long formation that is very rare in the world and remarkably underexplored. And we're very grateful that our team led us there in 2017.
Well, that was one of my takeaways from my visit in 2019. And one of the things I often say about the world in general, but is that pretty much all the world has been prospected. I mean, somebody somewhere sometime walked across the ground and eyeballing it, and hey, look, there's something shiny. I'll pick it up. Hey, what's this? They prospected. The world has not been explored. And in your site, Mike, out of Stillwater, I mean, you're right next to the Stillwater Siboney operation, which has been around since the 1930s and before. That Stillwater zone, I mean, it produced the chrome that the U.S. used in World War II, things like that. So you're right next to an operating mine, but you've got it surrounded, so to speak, in terms of your land claims. And what you figured out and what you showed me when I was there the last time was that you have proven up the idea that it's not just this one zone that the old Stillwater, now Stillwater Siboney. This isn't just all of it. There's a whole lot more out and around it. And I mean, I remember landing the helicopter on Chrome Mountain. Gee, why do they call it Chrome Mountain or Iron Mountain? And gee, why do they call it Iron Mountain? There's a whole lot of just sort of very fundamental. Just in the names, it gives away some of the game.
And it's interesting now that especially with Danie and Albie on board, that we are finding that Chrome Mountain has actually seen the most magmatic activity, and that fits with these chrome stringers that we see and why they probably historically called it Chrome Mountain. And that's the area that has the deepest looking feeder systems possibly underneath it, reaching down 5-6 kilometers. There's a lot going on there. Also at Iron Mountain, of course, as well. But there's a reason they named them chrome and iron historically. They weren't crazy. They knew what they saw back in the day.
So, gents, I'm just going to jump in because I think that was just about as good of a segue to inviting Dr. Danie Grobler to join, as served that up very nicely. In the Q&A, I think I will probably get to some of the if there's interest rate stuff or whatever. But I think that's a really good jumping off point to talk about the parallels with the legendary Northern Bushveld and Bushveld in general in South Africa, with both the JM or the Merensky and UG2 reefs. Obviously, Dr. Danie Grobler coming to us from Ivanhoe and from the Platreef project, which is now well into construction. Maybe so, Danie, thanks for joining us. Maybe just give a quick who you are, a little background, and then we'll jump in.
So I'm Danie Grobler. I'm from South Africa originally. Been working on the Bushveld for a decade or two now. So we've seen a lot of the bushveld, the mineralization, the models there that's applied. And yeah, we have been on the ground now at Stillwater, the layered complex there. We need to understand nickel exploration is not in a recession at the moment. And that, I think that's really good for all of us as geologists. Stillwater is one of the biggest layered complexes in the world, and we cannot walk away from that. What we're seeing there from the work we've done now is the lower part of Stillwater is really underexplored. Although there's been significant work been done in history, which is really good, and it gives us a broad database to work from. We've been digging into all that information. We're seeing significant parallels. We're seeing differences also, which is really good. And we've seen a lot of metal in the lower part of Stillwater. So that's really important. There's been some really significant hits in the exploration drilling that's been done. And we focus on that. We've seen really good parallels with mineralization, such as the JM Reef, which occurs stratigraphically above the lower part of Stillwater. The pegmatoidal peroxenites I've been talking about, the association with chromatite stringers. I think that's really important. We've been busy working on that. The whole team focused on all of that. And without getting too technical, we seeing a really good geology there and prospective ground. And I think that's really important.
Danie, can I chime in real quick?
Sure.
For people out there who are watching, they're a lot of them are not geologists, and I'm sure they're interested or they wouldn't be here, obviously. But can you explain, as a South African geologist who's worked, what is a layered reef? We hear this term, you've used it, and what happened? How long ago is it? Like Precambrian, or is it more recent? What puts that stuff there? Where's it coming from?
Yeah, look, if you compare to bushveld's late Proterozoic, 2 billion years old, basically. Mm-hmm. But Stillwater is older. It's late Archean, it's 2.7 billion years old. Look, there's a couple of hundred layered complexes across the world, but the really serious ones are like bushveld and Stillwater. These are the big systems. They've been endowed with these layered reefs, which are called stratiform reefs. So these complexes are layered. So these are flat-lying reefs, which are a couple of meters thick. And that's the main focus for PGEs and chrome and nickel copper.
Did they crystallize from a melt that came up from deep in the...
Yeah. So these are magmas intruding from the mantle of the Earth. They're deep-seated magmas. They're mostly ultramafic, mafic type of magmas, which are totally different from, example, granitic magmas. Mm-hmm. So these are really important. These metals are coming from the mantle of the Earth, which are associated with the PGEs and the nickel and copper. And these are concentrated into sulfide minerals. So the focus is basically in the exploration to find the sulfide minerals. It could be quite complex if there's not a lot of sulfide associated with these types of reef. But we've all gone through the grind as a geological team, and we understand what to look for. So, and I think that's the important thing. You need people with experience, serious experience in these complexes. The geology can be fairly complex. The magmas intrude. They don't intrude into open space. They assimilate the host rock, whichever kind of host rock it is. And if you have really reactive types of host rock, that could be important. The magma extracts minerals like sulfur or elements like sulfur out of the host rocks and basically crystallize these sulfide minerals, which will incorporate the platinum, palladium, and nickel copper elements. So that's quite important. Geophysical anomalies are important, but the real understanding of the geology is also important. And that's our focus at the moment. We're resolving the stratigraphic control of these different layers. and also the structural control. And I think we've made significant strides over the last few weeks. We're really starting to put a model together now, a detailed model, and I'm really positive about what we're seeing so far.
What was the biggest surprise after having been to site and been to the core shack?
Well, you guys have got much more outcrop, what we call outcrop as geologists. So that's rocks that are actually exposed on surface. In South Africa, the bushvelt's not, there's very little outcrop actually associated with the mafic, ultramafic part of the bushveld, especially what's called the critical zone where the Marinsky Reef and GD2 occurs. So we've basically got less than 1% outcrop in South Africa on that. So you have to drill to look at geology. But here at Stillwater, you know, we actually saw quite a lot of outcrop, and that assists us significantly in our interpretive phase of work. And then there's been some good drilling done in the past and recently also by the company. So we're putting all of that information together. We're going through the database, through the historic work that's been done in the past also, and Albie's been able to put a fairly detailed model into the Leapfrog software so far. And I have to say, it looks like we can start to see a continuous reef type of development, and we are connecting the dots as we dig through all the information.
Of which there are volumes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was the exact right time to add these guys, frankly, because if you look at the build of the project from 2017 with the historic core that we inherited, physical and data, and then adding, first of all, two guys that have decades of experience at Stillwater, Justin Madru, Mike Austenson, and then adding Craig Bowe and Dave Broughton from Ivanhoe, and then building out the team from there, drilling 3 rounds ourselves, and then adding these guys. It's just a really good setup, and it's the absolute right time to do this body of work to guide the next programs with greater accuracy and really build this out. It's 5 deposits across 9 kilometers that look like they want to connect, and that's the correct scale for a Platreef style system. We've got 32 kilometers total of strike, so this wants to get bigger, and these are the right guys to lead it.
I guess, Mike, just to these guys, we should plug Albie as well. Danie and Albie both came to us relatively recently, I guess, this spring. But yeah. And Byron, I don't think you've met them in person, but you will in a matter of a couple of weeks. Mike, you'll also be down at site again with the board. Maybe just a little bit about Albie as well, an important new member.
Sure. Do you want to take that, Danie, or shall I? Yes. I think he's sitting right behind you anyways.
Yeah, sure. He's hiding here. Albie's got significant experience in South Africa. He's worked on greenstone belts. He's worked all over South Africa for goldfields initially. He's joined Ivanhoe in the year 2000 already, I think, on the Platreef. So he's one of the people that's been there for the longest time, actually, as I know. So he's got significant experience on Platreef. He's worked across the entire Platreef, like myself also. We've been on several projects in the past. So we've seen a lot of that geology. But Albie's big focus, and that was important for me, as I said to you when we discussed our approach to this company, is that he's a really good structural geologist. He's resolved significant structural work on the Platreef, which hasn't been done in the past across the entire northern limb of the bushveld. And he's in the process of publication on that, actually, with some really good academic people.
So, can I chime in real quick? I think it's worth mentioning also that in addition to Danie and Arnie, Mike, you could describe this a little bit, but you have also been working with the U.S. Geological Survey on this, and that's one of the premier, scientific organizations in the country. They seem to have a high level of interest, and if not curiosity, in what you're finding. I mean, maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That is fundamental to our work. We entered a data sharing with them in the very early stages. I think it was 2018, working with Craig Bowe, actually, who's one of our senior technical advisors on the project. And the USGS, as you mentioned, has been studying Stillwater since the 90s at least. Mike Zintek in particular, Alan Anderson. They were thrilled to share data with us. And of course, they write the lists of critical commodities for administrations, for the government. So we're expanding. I'm pleased to report we're expanding our work with them. And I'm looking forward to what that'll bring. They're going to be on site again with us in a matter of weeks here. And the collaboration has been really fruitful and fun, frankly.
So maybe I'll just back us up a little bit. At the beginning, we talked about, Byron, you brought up the Norilsk project as a major global deposit and area of importance. And we've talked about Platreef and we've talked about Bushveld, but we haven't really just talked about what that is, what that means, why that's important, that we're drawing that parallel with us. So I don't know, maybe Byron, talk a little bit about that, or Mike, and then Danie, obviously you're well familiar with the area, maybe just round it out. But what is Northern Bushveld? What is Platreef, and why is it important that we make that analog, draw that comparison?
Why don't I give the high level and then invite Byron or Danie to take it from there. Bushveld is the biggest source of PGEs in the world. It's home to 3/4 of the world's platinum resources. A lot of those are in those narrow reef style deposits. That's what happens when effectively magmas are allowed to settle in a certain way and they form. I know that's not the right term, Danie, you can correct me. But effectively you get a 1 or 2 meter wide deposit at higher grade. Expensive to mine, and what we've seen is a shift away from that with the advent of the mines of the Platreef, which is the northern Bushveld. This gets into bulk mining scenarios and economies of scale. Anglo-American runs their giant Mahalaquena pits there. These are the biggest platinum mines in the world. Ivanhoe, with the Platreef project just south of that, is an underground mechanized approach. Very high grades, and aside from the bulk tonnage aspect and the size that brings, you also get much more battery metals. And that's what's really relevant here in the US, is that 3/4 of our resources, even at the metal prices used back in 2021, 3/4 of the resources are battery metals, 1/3 PGEs, precious, actually including gold, and 2/3 battery. So we're adding significant battery metals to the mix. It's a more diverse basket, if you will, than the typical reef mine, which has much less nickel copper. And then scale, right? And our neighbor, Sibanye, runs excellent mines at the highest grade in the world. They have 100 million ounces, actually. They're expanding year over year, but there's only so fast they can expand because it's a 1.8 meter wide deposit. And that's kind of typical of these reef mines. They probably want to grow it faster, frankly, but the mining method dictates a certain operating style. The Platreef model brings these bigger methods into play and economies with them. Danie or Byron, feel free to jump in.
I'll just chime in here that, Chris, you mentioned a couple of spots, Norilsk, the South African plays. I mean, these things are rare in the world. I mean, the planet is a big place, but in terms of where did the crust of the earth, open up over historic, deep geologic time? We're talking literally 2 billion and more years. When did it open up and let these magmas move up, from the mantle into the crust? I mean, the locales are very rare, and the ability to find and mine these locales are also very rare. And so we're looking at very important geological angles to how these things got there in the first place. I mentioned earlier, like in the projects in Minnesota that just can't seem to get a break. I mean, there's actually a failed rift system in Minnesota and up through Lake Superior that this again 2.5 billion years ago. It almost broke open, but it didn't, and the magmas came up, and which is why you get those incredible copper deposits in northern Michigan, for example. Here's a sample of native elemental copper from northern Michigan, the Keweenaw Peninsula. But that's copper. But there's nickel as well, and there's PGMs, but it's in different places. The problem with Minnesota is that you've got all that water, pristine water and wetlands above it. Nobody wants to mine it. If you're in South Africa, I mean, I was in South Africa, it was probably, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. I think I went to a place called Rustenburg, and there's a PGM mine there. Probably went down 2,500 feet, and I think more, to these tiny little, foot wide zones that these guys were mining. I mean, it's 120 degrees down there. You're just sweating. These guys are working like dogs to get the material out of it. Very high cost, very high labor, very expensive to get this material out. And that's the world that's what's coming out of the ground. And that's your cost structure right now. But then along comes, Stillwater, Montana, where you're in a mining district. You're literally right down the street from, Stillwater, Sibanye. You're in an area that understands mining, that's permitted, where you can do the environmental studies. Your grade is high, grade is king, always, grade is great. So you can high grade it if you want, and I don't believe you can tell us if you've figured out a mining model for this yet, or you're still just kind of building the basic geology. But that is why it's so important that we're talking about Montana, Stillwater, something here in the US versus literally on the other side of the world, or, like with Russia, which is great geology, but tough politics,
And Danie, before you jump in, just maybe add two things to the mix in your response. And that one is just to give us a perspective of the scale of what we're looking at with Sibanye Stillwater and the Stillwater District and us, and then put that in context of maybe of Platreef or Northern Bushveld or that area to give us a sense of size comparison maybe. And then the second one is, what about the geometry? There was flat reef, and how does that compare to Stillwater, for example?
I think it's important to understand Stillwater is actually quite a big intrusion. It's a big layered complex, and there's actually a large part of it hidden to the northeast, if I get my directions right, in North America. My compass is a bit unsettled, but it's really big and it compares well. I think it compares pretty well with the Bushveld complex in size also, especially with this new discovered northern part of the Stillwater complex. If you look at Stillwater, the lower part of Stillwater, where there's been significant thickness intersections with grade, compared to Platreef, it compares pretty well. The Platreef, on average, on the Ivanhoe property where we work, was about 20 meters thick, running at a really good grade, 3.8 to 4 grams a ton, with significant nickel copper attributes. So we're seeing similar grades here in intersections in the past on Stillwater. And it's, just on strike length, this is about half of the northern limb of the Bushveld complex, which is really big for one company to own. Usually it's much smaller properties that are being owned. So I think for the company itself, for Stillwater Critical Minerals, it's really important to have such a big strike length. It actually gives us multiple opportunities to find and to look for these kinds of deposits. And that's what we're seeing, Crow Mountain, Iron Mountain, all these different intersections that have been hit in the past. And we're also seeing some mineralization associated with cross-cutting structures in shear zones. For example, the high-grade gold-nickel occurrences and some of the other gold occurrences. So these are really important intersections that have been made through the drilling, the exploration drilling. And we're looking at all of these things. And we've been surprised of how much is actually visible on surface. And Albie and I have been there now. We've looked at it. It really looks positive, I have to say.
So I can't believe it's already been 50 minutes. So we're going to jump into a Q&A here in a second. But just as a jumping off point before we get into that, Mike, picking up from where Danie left off, what was that gold intercept highlight from 2020?
From the Pine? Yeah, I don't actually have it off the top of my head. High grade. I mean, there's a mineralized body there that in a non-43101 sense is averaging 8.5 grams gold with some decent size as a starter resource. That's not 43101 yet, and that's something we're working to bring on the table. But the drill intercepts reflect that. They were up to 15 grams per ton gold over.
That was what I was trying to get you to say. Yeah. So the intercepts there, just to repeat, were above 15. I think it was actually 16 gram per ton gold intercept in that area.
Sounds right. Yeah.
And I can't quite remember the width, but this wasn't half a meter. This was it was a really
and
interesting.
It surprises people for this. It's known for PGEs and also battery metals.
Yeah,
that's off the west, of course, and that's something that we've been putting some attention to. We feel that we're finally starting to understand it now, and I think the public can look to have a resource on that in the coming, let's say, year or so, just to be pessimistic. But we're starting to feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, and I guess just flagging that gold one, because we hadn't really talked much about gold, but then the nickel intercepts, that we had recently that are significantly higher than the basis of the resource, but just maybe what were those, Mike?
Oh, well, yeah, the Chrome Mountain hits, those were a wonderful surprise. They were driven by the IP survey that we did in 2020 and then the expanded one in 2021. You've seen those images in our deck. That has been a fantastic tool guiding us to grade in this system and understanding the system. To answer your question, yeah, 8.5 meters at 1.7% nickel equivalent in 2020, and then 125 meters from that in 2021, we hit 13.2 meters at 3.3% nickel equivalent. 2.3% of that is actual nickel, and it's high tenor. I don't recall exactly, it's 6% or something nickel tenor, which is important, and it's nice looking pentlandite. We have good optimism on the metallurgy around that. That got my phone ringing, frankly. That's a monster hit in gold equivalent. That's, over 10 grams per ton gold over 13 meters. That's significant. I don't know that the market always understands nickel intercepts. They forget that it's triple the price of copper right now, for example.
Yeah. Well, I think we touched on Tesla at the beginning and some of the Elon Musk comments in the past about looking for nickel projects. And then just recently this week saw Mitsubishi step into the game again with a deal with one of our North American peers, let's call them. So these groups are shopping around and they're looking for projects in North America, and they're looking for nickel. And if you throw in some of those kickers like we have, bright future. So jumping into the Q&A, because it's heating up a little bit here. So thanks for your patience, everyone. So I'll jump into this one. So Danie and Albie, can Danie talk about economic mineral volumes and grades identified in the Platreef? How much metals are contained and how that compares with Stillwater? Now, obviously, it's early days for us and it's advanced days for them, but maybe frame that up in terms of potential, or answer it as you will, but where can we get to?
Look, the Platreef reserve is really huge, over a very small footprint, and it's mainly because of high grade and it's Marinsky type grades, and the real thickness. So they declared 42 million ounces over a footprint of about 2 by 2 kilometers. So that's a huge deposit. The reef can get up to 90 meters thick in certain areas. But we've had similar intersects, maybe not at those grades entirely for the whole intersect on Stillwater so far, which really got us excited. And that's why we came here. There's significant parallels with the geology. So I personally wouldn't have come if I thought there was no potential there. I'm late in my career, so you know, I can't take risks like this, but I did. So I think that there's real potential. What we've seen in the field so far and in the core, there's nothing that I'm concerned about. So the big thing is to put this together, to find continuous mineralization that can be drilled out. And our models are being built at the moment as we speak with significant detail because of a massive amount of information that's already available. There's significant geophysical work that's been done here. We're not used to that in South Africa. I think one important thing maybe which I should mention here is that through all the scientific work we've done on the Platreef, and this is published, there's multiple publications on this. There was a thematic issue just on the Platreef itself that was published in the International Journal in 2021, I think, last year, where we showed that this high-grade mineralization in the Platreef is actually Merensky Reef itself. And there are scientific reasons for that reef being so thick on the northern limb. And we've actually drilled, through all the drilling that Ivan has done, the UG2 below it on the northern limb for the first time in history. So our main model is built on that those geological characteristics we discovered on the northern limb, which is was a significant breakthrough in our view. And like I said, all of this information is published. Ivan allowed us to publish it, and I think it was really important to do that. And this is the model we bring into Stillwater, and for now it seems to hold together. You need the stratiform reef to bring in your metal mineralization from the mantle, and that reef then interacts with the host rock in certain positions, and that dictates and controls where the mineralization will be. And that's what we're looking currently at. Our real focus is on understanding and unraveling this puzzle in Stillwater. If it was easy, it would have happened previously already, but the model is holding together so far, and it's looking really good.
Well, rewriting history takes a little time. Mike, just quickly give dimensions roughly. So the resource area, let's say, and the expanded resource area, and then in context of the whole property, because Danie, I think you said 2.5 by 2.5 kilometers on that massive deposit.
On a very small footprint, you can, if you've got thickness and grade, obviously you're going to declare a massive resource.
Absolutely.
And I think the potential is there. We've seen significant intersections that have been press released for critical minerals. So I think that's important. There's potential there, massive potential.
Yeah, and we've got multiple kilometer scale target areas that show the potential for that. They're all correctly positioned beneath the JM Reef stratigraphically for that Platreef setting. Obviously, we're focused on the core 9 kilometers that host the 5 deposits. And then you've seen more recently, we expanded the IP survey to detail 12 kilometers of strike length. In terms of area, that might be 24 or more square kilometers. The claim block, I think, is 2.5 kilometers thick, north to south. So we're still only turning our attention to 12 kilometers of the total 32 span that we have, kilometers of lower Stillwater strike. We were very fortunate to tie this up in the bottom of the bear market. And to give a plug to the metallic group that we have here in the 3 companies, that's the district scale thinking, tie it up in the bear market, working with good people. In this case, it was Justin Madru, a local who'd worked on the ground before, and we were able to tie all that up. And there's almost no precedent. I think it's worked remarkably well for us. So yeah, to answer your question, Chris, 32 kilometers of strike, we're focused so far on 12 or even 9 of that. And the same potential is reflected on that broader package.
Okay, so Byron, I have one for you here in just a quick second. We had a little bit of a, what do you call it, clarification come in from somebody who might know of these, from whence he speaks here. So Pine has over an ounce per ton gold samples and intervals. Best interval is 8 meters at 16 grams per ton from the 80s drilling, awaiting this year's chip sample. So there's a little bit more on that. And we'll get to that second question, but this is kind of a, how to do this. I can put these two kind of questions together, but Byron, assuming you're aware, can you speak to the recent Gigametals nickel project and their Mitsubishi JV? Did you have any comments, thoughts there? And
well, yeah, I know about it, and I mean, we're here on a Stillwater broadcast, and what it indicates is that there's industrial downstream interest with people who have deep pockets who can write checks for good projects, and I think we're going to see more and more of it as events unfold. Recession, no recession, good economy, bad economy. We're looking at things that have to happen over the next 10 and 15 and 20 years. And you want to be careful about just, fixating on day-to-day problems or monthly problems or quarterly problems or something like that. If you're General Motors, if you're Ford, if you're, BMW, if you're Mitsubishi, if you're Toyota, you worry about the next 6 months and next year, but really you're worrying about 5 and 8 and 10 and 20 years down the line, because if you have to be able to tell the engineers what to design and build. You have to tell them today what to design and build, and your procurement people have to be able to supply the metal and supply the parts and components 5 and 10 and 15 years from now. They have very long time horizons, and so that's why it's important that that we're talking about developing a project. We're talking about developing a project today, but this is a multi-year project. I want to mention one more thing, Mike. When I was there a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I met the team that had assembled your land package. A very remarkable group of people who, over several years of just really grinding away, nitpicking, just waiting for mineral claims to expire and going in and grabbing them. I mean, they did a brilliant job of locking up your land package, which is why you have such a very big land package, and why Danie and Arnie have so much rock to play with. I mean, because if you don't control the mineral claims, well, it's nice science, but it's not a business proposition. But in terms of your land claims, you've got a business proposition.
Absolutely, and we've kept 100% of it this far for that reason. As Danie mentioned, it's wide open. We don't know what we have yet, but it looks a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. So we're happy to just keep working it for now.
So there's a couple more that I can put together a little bit, Mike. What are the timetables for PEA, PFS, feasibility? But bundle that into, do you plan to bring the property into production or just sell? That's can kind of be answered together, I think. Sure.
Well, and the Mitsubishi Giga deal speak to the increasing interest from industry, frankly. We've always had interest in Stillwater. I think that's increasing. And the model here most likely is to sell to a bigger party. I wouldn't rule out other deal structures, but not at this relatively early stage. We haven't obviously seen one that we like to date. We're reluctant to put a set value on the asset, for example, because it simply looks like it wants to get a lot bigger. But the right partner, the right deal, that might be next month, it might be next year. The most typical trajectory would be for us to build this up, show more potential, further de-risk it, and then do that deal with a bigger player. Would we build a mine ourselves? Possibly, with the right backers, and that's certainly possible. The most likely model would be a takeover of some sort. In terms of feasibilities and such, near-term focus on resource expansion, and first of all, on completing Danie and Albie's excellent work modeling what we have with the insights from the South African mines. And then the bigger resource, which we expect later this year based on last year's drilling. Focus next year on further resource increases, but also on metallurgy and starting to do the items that would be in a proper pre-feasibility study. So start to tick the boxes on those things. We've always considered mine models, but it's early days to really discuss that. But everything we do is done with a view to a successful project, frankly. So feasibility, I wouldn't even necessarily put that next year, but it's certainly something we're thinking of.
Feasibility.
Sorry, pre-fees.
Yeah. So Danie, I'll circle back to you in just 1 second here, but I think this is, well, I'll ask it of Mike because it somewhat relates to the discussion about the future and trajectory and so on. This question frames up comparing the amount of drilling and so on that was in Bushveld to define mineralization and I suppose resource and reserves and so on. From there, how much more drilling is expected to be needed at Stillwater, and obviously with a property this size and so on. I mean, you can drill till kingdom come, but obviously those projects are far further down the trail. They're advanced in development and construction and almost there. But yeah, maybe put that in the context of us doing that, and how much drilling to expand the resource, and when would we maybe shift to economics and partnership scenario on getting that work done.
Is that to me or to Danie?
Yeah, no, we'll start with you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as Danie mentioned, we're blessed that our mineralization starts at surface, and we have outcrop to work from, and we can do shorter holes. So that's an immense savings. The 37,000 meters that have been drilled to date is, we definitely need more. And we're aware that we're a small company with a big asset. And that's where bigger budgets and partners would come in. We'd be glad to spend tens of millions in a year on drilling, and give us a couple of years of that, and I don't think we'd own the project anymore based on what we see. I don't think we have to drill it out is the point. Frankly, I know at Platreef, they were running, what, 3 dozen rigs at once, Danie, you were telling me, and 10,000 meters a week. These systems are worthy of that scale of work. We're blessed that in the short term, we can add a lot just by focusing on 3 of those 5 deposit areas, which is what we think you'll see later this year.
Yeah. Danie, I told you I had one coming for you. So what do you think about the picket pin horizon?
It's interesting. It seems to be conforming to a stratiform type reef. We've been looking at it. I think we need to take a very careful look at it. The good thing about it, it's a known reef and it's been drilled in certain areas. So to understand it, we need to do more work on it. I don't think it's a massive priority at the moment for us, but it's worth looking at. And I've told the team that to follow a stratiform reef is not that difficult. The mineralization seems to be comparable to what we have in South Africa in the reef above the Merensky Reef, which is called the Bastard Reef. There's a reason it's got that name. So picket pin is interesting. There's some great intersections in the past, and the company holds most of that ground at the moment. So we'll definitely take a look at it. Our main focus would be on these more wider intercepts with very good grades we've seen so far, and that's where we are focused at the moment. Like Mike says, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but somewhere along the line you need to start to focus, and that's what I'm trying to do. is to look at what's overall available on the different intersections that we've had so far. And my main focus would be on the more pigmentoidal reefs associated with the chrome seniors, because that's where the high grades are usually found in these types of systems. But we haven't touched on that yet. Lower down in the stratigraphy, we are seeing nickel, copper, some very good grades coming through, and we're starting to understand the control on those also, on that mineralization. Obviously, building the model on that also. So we're spreading our wings here from what we learned in the Platreef, because we saw similar mineralization lower down in the Platreef towards the footwall. So that's also potentially a very significant nickel copper target for us. And there's been some good intersections so far. We need to find a continuous type of reef there, and put that together and start to drill that. So to me, the two priorities would be the pigmentoidal reef and this nickel copper sulfide mineralization lower down.
Can I just add on to that real quick? I mean, the job right now, for Danie and Arnie and Mike and everybody else on the team, is to build the basic model of what's there. We're talking about, is there an exit strategy for JVing or to sell it to right now, the job is to build that model in a very, very underexplored, in many ways unexplored region, to depth, to scope, what is the structural model? What is the mineralogical model? What are the grade models? I mean, you just build a fundamental idea of what this thing is, because that's what you're going to be showing to your potential partners or potential buyers. That's what they're going to be looking for. So it's just critical to, that every drill hole has a reason for being there. Every assay, gives you the data that you need to just, to plug in all those parameters and just build up an idea of what's there. Because in South Africa, they've been drilling these things for decades. 100 years. And I'm not saying it's extremely well understood there either, but it sure as heck isn't terribly well understood here in Montana. Right now the idea is to wrap your brain around it and build the best possible model you can, and then present that to potential partners, and of course to the market, because the analysts out there who follow this, they have mining engineers on their staff too, and they know what to look for, and they want to see what they need to see in order to put out the buy recommendations on the share price, which is extremely beaten down and undervalued now, in my opinion, although I'm not giving personal financial advice.
I should almost just wrap it up right there. But the room is still almost full. So maybe just a few more here. Maybe we'll just give it another 5 minutes if everyone has time. So it's not always advisable, maybe, but I like these kind of questions because they're blunt and yeah, let's just go for it. So Byron, from there, third party, what can kill the project?
Well, I think the most immediate death sentence to a project is politics and sociology. If somebody comes along and says, we're going to sue the heck out of you under, this law, that law, whatever, we're going to tie you up in court forever. There's so many different ways to do it. Somebody can come along and start, yanking drilling permits, yanking water permits, air emission permits, things like that. Look at, just by way of a very, unfortunate example, look at the Ambler project up in Alaska, beautiful copper cobalt project that had their Corps of Engineers approval to build a road, and the Biden administration took them to court in Anchorage and, suspended the road permit. Bam, that's a death sentence right there. When I say death, hopefully this project will get back on track, but that's a real derailing moment, So what can kill it in a hurry? Politics and litigation is probably the big thing, which is why, it's nice that we're in Montana. It's a known jurisdiction. You've got a relationship with the locals, the regionals, the state government. the federal government. It's great that the USGS is interested in this. It's a mining state historically. I mean, you're down the road from Butte, Montana, which, for better or for worse, has its own environmental issues. But it's a state that understands it. So hopefully that won't happen. As far as geologically, right now the geology seems to be our friend here. When you drill according to your models, you seem to be able to find things that you're looking for. And so I would be more worried about, just sort of the extraneous stuff like politics and sociology, as opposed to, something wrong geologically. I mean, last June, you had a big rainstorm that washed out some roads. Rain comes, rain goes. They build a new road and, you're back to work. So I guess that would answer the question.
Yeah, and Mike, that's kind of where I wanted to go with that, and follow up with you and talk about the jurisdiction, the area, relationships, what we've done, what we're doing, et cetera, to mitigate those other outside forces. And of course, what we talked about at the beginning with the push for critical minerals on a national level and so on. So jump off from there.
Yeah, Byron actually did a great job summarizing there. We're basically bringing the third wave of critical mineral supply to the district, right? I mean, it was producing high-grade nickel and copper in the late 1800s. The local town was built on mining, and then chromium during the war years. And then starting in 1986 and increasing ever since, PGE is the highest grade in the world. We're right next door. There are old roads and drill pads all over our claims. Permitting has been a dream, frankly. It's been one of the easiest jurisdictions. There's a clear process, 90 days for this, 30 days for that. We do it. And forestry often has a study on the shelf from a past operator or from Sibanye that they apply, and the box is checked and we're done. We're permitted for 5 years on 50 drill pads. More broadly in the state, Montana has a very healthy resource economy. Not many know that, but oil and gas, especially in the east. Copper mining, as you mentioned, in Butte, open pit copper mining at Montana Resources, Rio and now Ivanhoe, both active in the state. And then Rio doing that critical minerals geophysical survey in the Boulder batholith area in Butte. It's a place that we can operate, and I think we can build mines.
Okay, so just two more really quickly. I'll probably just field the second one, but power situation in Montana, and this one specifically, can you say something about green or hydropower in Montana and maybe the distance to our grounds? You could also point to some of these recent announcements of camps being powered by alternative energy forms, solar and whatnot, but hydro and or power in the area.
Yeah, Montana has a lot of hydropower. And in fact, they've just opened a massive data center that's powered by hydro in a very green sense. The grid is significantly hydro, and I think maybe even 50% green. I honestly can't recall off the top of my head, but it's significant. Obviously, Sibanye is operating 3 mines right next door to us, and their grids come in from the north, I believe. We're right adjacent to that, so.
Okay, and just the last question was circling back to what we talked about near the beginning with the recent announcements from the Biden-Harris administration about investments in domestic critical minerals. Can we apply, receive benefits from these programs, as we talked about in the beginning? We're looking into that. It looks like yes, we check a lot of the boxes in a lot of different areas, from the critical minerals and specifically, the nickel and cobalt, plus the carbon sequestration and so on. So the short answer is, it looks like it, and we certainly will be trying our hand at that with the help of some of our contacts.
And let's give a plug there for the National Mining Association.
Another plug, yeah.
Yeah, we're members, and invite anybody to look them up for more information. Also the USGS, of course.
Absolutely.
We're partnered with them.
An hour and 22 minutes, and it just flew by. Maybe just any last thoughts, comments, starting with Danie.
Yes. Look, I think we're starting to understand the geology fairly well. We can see where and the reasons for where grade was hit in intersections, and also where grade was not hit. With the structural model that Albi's putting together, it makes a lot of sense to us now. I think that's quite important to build out this model into detail, and that will guide us on our future exploration and to cite our holes. That's in short. I think we're getting there, and by the time next year the drilling season comes up, I think we would be ready.
Okay, and welcome back to Vancouver, Danie. I'll see you next week on Monday. Byron, any parting thoughts, comments?
Well, anybody who has been watching this, and if you've sat through it this far, or if you even skipped ahead and now you're at the end and you want to hear what we have to say, thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest in this company. You're interested in investing, or you're interested in what this company is doing. This is an important project. It's big. It has size. It has scope. It has grade. It's you might say a brownfield development because it's right next to a working mine. It has a lot of the right things that are all coming together in terms of the ability to explore, the ability to develop, the ability to build. When you talk about power, I mean, you're on that western grid, and you're up where they can wheel power over from the Grand Coulee Dam or whatever. So I mean, it's very doable in a traditional mining jurisdiction. I love the geology. I say that as a geologist and as a newsletter writer, and having been there and planning to go there again in the not too distant future, and take a look at what Danie's pulling out of the ground. So if you haven't looked at Stillwater Critical Minerals, please do so. Look at the website, look at the presentations, and decide if you want to buy some underpriced shares right now, and wait for these guys to deliver some more good news to you.
And I will just say that website address, very easy to remember, criticalminerals.com. Feel free to ask us how we managed to get that domain. Byron, where can people find you? And I assume that you may have some comments after visiting the site in Korshak with the team again. Where can people find and read you?
I am associated with what used to be Agora Financial. It's Paradigm Publishing now. I've actually been working. I'll be working going ahead back with Jim Rickards, who is a well-known macroeconomist, gold guy, so I'll be writing about things, with his publications through Paradigm, and also I contribute to a group called Investor Intel in Toronto, and again I write about mines, minerals, and things like that.
Okay, so I would encourage everyone to look up Byron King, look up Investor Intel, and read his musings and missives and excellent work. We've known each other for a number of years. Always enjoy reading you. And I'm just going to say thanks, everyone, for joining us and taking the time. Mike, President and CEO, take us out.
You bet. Excellent words from everyone. And thank everyone for joining us. I echo Byron's sentiments there. We're excited. The excitement that I saw in the Korshak 2 weeks ago when I joined for 4 days was remarkable. It's really fun, frankly, to be rewriting the textbook like this on the Lower Stillwater Complex, and the fact that it brings great economic benefit is even more rewarding. Lots of updates to follow, lots of catalysts in the hopper, and watch also as a final note, Heritage Mining is completing their IPO. They're of course earning into our district scale gold project in Ontario, and that will give us good exposure to the gold space as they complete and issue us those shares and get to work on that project. So lots to follow, and please feel free to reach out anytime. We love what we do, and we're happy to talk about it.
I hate to jump in and get the last word after that excellent wrap up, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we will be doing a presentation on the OTC markets battery metals virtual event. That is August 23rd. I think it's at 11 a.m. Pacific time, if I'm not mistaken, but double check that website, otcmarkets.com. For that, Mike will give a comprehensive project and company overview. that will be more linear and walking you through the traditional setup there, as well as a Q&A session for all the latest. And don't forget to follow us on social media, which is an okay place if you use it in reasonable measure. We are at Stillwater_CM, and sign up on our website to get updates like the one we sent this morning and receive news. With that, thanks again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy your week, and looking forward to chatting with all of you soon.
Thanks all.